Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Legal and General Just Covered podcast, where we talk to intermediaries, key stakeholders and absolutely anyone in the intermediary space. My name's Wayne.
And I'm Hazel, and we've got a really special episode today because we're joined by Rhian, who is the founder of the To Wish charity. So thank you so much for joining us, and really, really looking forward to hearing your story, which I think will be a very mixed emotions as we go through this podcast, just to warn any listeners. But do you want to tell us a little bit about the charity initially, and then obviously we can go into the foundations behind it and where you got the idea to set it up?
Yeah, so thank you for having me. So To Wish is a bereavement charity that supports families and anyone really affected by the sudden death of a child or young adult up to the age of about 25. So we support families immediately in the hospital after this happens and for as long as they need it through different ways of support and therapy and just being there for them so families don't feel alone during like the most hardest times of their life, really.
I think that's the key part, isn't it? It's those young people. So I guess the people if you don't expect to lose. And what's the difference between that charity and maybe what you've got available elsewhere? Because I think everyone assumes, don't they, there's lots of resource out there. So tell us a bit about that side of it.
Yeah, so I set the charity up due to personal circumstances, and you've never been through things like that before, so you expect there to be things in place, and there just isn't. And there are pockets of really good work across the UK, but very little to support sudden death in young people. So we know we're helping people at the hardest times, and we know that we're making a difference. And that's really lovely to know that our service is helping.
And how big is your service at the moment? How many people do you have supporting you, working for you at the moment?
So at the moment, I've got about 40 staff.
Wow.
We've now got over 150 therapists and counsellors working for us as well. They work alongside us. But we've got an expansion plan. So we're growing every year across England. So we're very much a Welsh charity. We've expanded into the bordering areas of Wales. And later this year, we're moving into another area as well. So we'll be taking on at least another 15 members of staff as well.
So it's a big operation then, Rhian, that you managed to start just from yourself on the, the ground up.
And it is a big organisation now. I forget that, I think, at times because it's just naturally happened. And it's quite frightening, because I used to be a PE teacher. That's all I'd ever done in my life. So now to be sort of running this, charity as a business at the end of the day, it's quite daunting at times. But I do enjoy it despite the subject matter.
Yeah, and by the fact that you're growing, the sudden death in young people, in children, it is out there. It's obviously that there's a lot of it happening, and obviously there was a gap there through your own personal story in terms of you setting it up. Yeah. So obviously today is about telling us a little bit about that and how that came to pass. Whilst what you're doing is absolutely amazing, you must pinch yourself in terms of where you are in terms of what you've built, but that's come out of something which is quite tragic, isn't it?
Yeah, it's difficult because I do enjoy what I do now. I've met incredible people and my life has changed and got better since things happened back in 2012. And what we went through as a family will always stay with me. But I think seeing an organisation like To Wish grow and help people, it's a legacy to really what I lost. Yeah. So back in 2012, when George died, my youngest son, we were just this normal family, nothing had ever happened to us that would have rocked us. And we had 3 children. Holly was 3, Isaac was 2, and George was 1. And George just fell ill very suddenly, was rushed to our local hospital, and within 2 hours had passed away. And the staff who worked with us were amazing. They really were lovely. But we left with no advice. We were just given some phone numbers for help, which when we rang them, no one answered. And even to this day, no one called back if we left a message. And, you go through life, we had these children and you have so much support when you have a child. But then when one of them dies completely unexpectedly, there was nothing for us. And then 5 days later, when I didn't think things could get any worse, is when my husband, my best friend, he walked out the house and he took his own life. So within 5 days, I lost my son and my husband. I had a 2 and 3-year-old to bring up on my own. And there wasn't anyone for us as a family. My mum and dad and my friends, my sister were the people who supported us when their whole world had changed as well. So Wish was born out of that, because no family should be left to go through those things. And I truly believe that if Wish had existed then, that Paul potentially would be here to watch his children grow up.
How scary to think, us sitting here, you think in 5 days' time, that is such a short period of time for such huge, impactful change to be happening. And I think you're right. Any family or friends will always help and support, but because they've never been through that, and as you said, they're grieving themselves as well. In those moments, I mean, casting around right back, what were your first thoughts in that time, and what was going through your head at that point?
The main things were my children. I had no idea how they were going to grow up. I didn't know how I was going to bring them up, but also I didn't want them to be singled out. I didn't want people knowing everything that was going on. And I did worry about them and their future. They were 2 and 3, that they hadn't even started life properly. And for me, I think I just didn't know how we were going to exist as a family. I think that was the main thing. I was very scared. Paul was our provider, so I only worked part-time. He provided financially for the family. He sorted the bills, but he also was the practical person. So you just wonder how you're going to get up the next day and live. And that does sound very dramatic, but that is how you feel. And I just didn't know how we were going to survive, basically.
But your life as you'd planned it and built, it wasn't there anymore, was it?
Yeah.
In that sense, And in terms of the children themselves, then did they have much of an understanding at that? They were so little at that point. I guess it must have been hard for them to also get their heads around.
Yeah, children are so incredibly resilient. Thankfully, they really are. But how do you talk to a child when you can't even understand it's happened yourself? So I can remember us thinking, how do we tell them that, firstly, that George has passed away? And we made up something around, when you're alive, you have a body full of sparkle, but when you pass away, you don't need just your body anymore. And that sparkle becomes a star. So they'll always be able to see George. I knew from my teaching that you must be very careful about your terminology. So you must be almost very honest about using the words like death and died, which is really, really difficult, and actually split opinions in our house that we shouldn't use those words. But when you really think of other words like gone to heaven and passed away and gone to sleep forever, if you really stop and think what that means, what does it mean to a child?
The impact of your words at that point, I suppose it's always important in conversations in everyday life, but in this scenario, you've really had to dissect the impact of your language and what you do. There must have been so many things going around in your mind, questions and just indecisive. You just don't know what to do you?
But it was not as worse as we thought. Like, it really wasn't that bad, because children are incredibly resilient and black and white. So we told them we had worked ourselves up. It was one of the hardest conversations I'll ever have with my children. And then Isaac just got up and picked up his ball and ran off, and didn't really mention it again. So we told them, we said that George wouldn't come back and wouldn't be coming home, and off they toddled. I didn't expect, about a week later, I did take a few days to tell them about Paul's death, that I'd have to say it again. And they are very black and white. I think Holly looked at me and just simply said, so that means that he's with George and that you look after us. And I suppose in a way, that's how it looked from their point of view.
How you I just can't imagine how you build yourself up, because you're probably thinking, I need to tell them, I don't want to leave, but then I've just told them about their brother.
I know.
What do I do? It just must have been crazy.
It was. I look back, I can remember a lot of it vividly, but it also felt like a dream that I was floating above watching it. But I actually, until you've been through it and you're living it, it's really hard to explain. So I didn't really plan on when I'd tell them. Paul worked away a lot with work, so I said he had gone away with work. And then we were talking and they just kept asking when he was coming home, and I sort of fobbed them off. And then about the 5th day, they said, I hope Daddy brings us a present. And I just knew. That's when I sat them down on the tiled floor. I can remember I was buttering toast. I sat them down, and that's when I told them. It wasn't planned. And again, they just got up and went on with their business. And I can honestly say at that point, for those first weeks, months, maybe the first year, you wouldn't have thought anything really significant had happened to them. We were a very close family. closer than ever now. But at the time, my mum and dad moved in. So for them, they had the familiar people around them still. Obviously, there were people missing, but their routine didn't change. You know, they didn't miss a day of school. They didn't miss football or rugby or ballet. My mum, my dad, my sister did all of that for us, for me as well. So it was hard, but actually they made it quite easy for me. But the whole time, it takes away that innocence of being a mother, because everything they said, every time they cried, every time they asked for something, I used to think it's because of what they were going through. And on a hand on heart, even 13 years on, if they're having a bad day, I sometimes think, I wonder if it's because of what happened. And that's what's really sad, because it takes away that innocence of childhood and growing up.
I think anyone would think that, wouldn't they? Anytime something negative's happening and they're upset, you're going to be thinking that. You would be human if you weren't. And
you take those boundaries away a little bit. Like my son, and if he hears this, it's not going to be a surprise. You know, he was difficult growing up, tantrums in his behaviour. And he used to say, I want my daddy. He used to say that a lot. Now, a lot of that was he knew what he was doing. You know, he knew he was pushing my boundaries. Children do.
Yeah.
So a lot of the time I had to remember that I had to stay strong to keep those boundaries in place for their benefit as they grew up. It was really hard. But
and all while you're grieving and missing that person as well.
Yeah.
That's the bit that I think you said you can't comprehend how that must be for you to try and not discipline her, but keep those boundaries, but actually inside you're probably melting every time you said that.
Absolutely. You know, and it's just so sad that their future now is without their brother and dad, and more about their dad, because their brother we found out he had pneumonia. You never want one of your children to pass away suddenly, but they do. And there was nothing they could do for George, but I will always think more should have been done for Paul, really, and the future should have been very different for my children.
And do you feel that if you had that, is that where the charity's really been born from? So absolutely you felt that you've needed support, but do you think there would have been a difference in Paul's mindset and mentality should there have been more support resources and callbacks and things that you deserved at that point?
100%. I really do, because, you know, for those 5 days you sit and you go through every second you spent with your son. You go through everything you did, everything you said, everything the hospital did. You are looking for not blame, but you're looking for why this happened, because you have no answers at this point.
It must be why for everything.
Everything.
Why me? Why now?
Everything.
Why at all?
Yeah. And that's all we did all weekend. We were very close. We were very open. We sat and all we did was go through every second of what did we do wrong? We must be to blame for this as a family and as a parent. We should have been able to prevent this. And that eventually is why we lost Paul, because he generally felt as a father he'd failed our family and that he should have done more.
With your experience, you've probably got, from what you've channeled into the charity, you've got, I want to call it, but support there to help parents, because you know what they're going to go through, the questions they're going to ask, and then to help hopefully then prevent those thoughts and obviously that horrible actions.
Everyone's different. It's difficult because you can't have a rule book. You can't have a structure because everybody grieves differently, you know, but there are common things that run through it. And one is blame and guilt. Right. So if when you lose a child, it could be suddenly, but it could be through young suicide, a road traffic accident, medical, which is have we lost George. You think you should have been aware. You shouldn't have let him take the car. You should have kept an eye on them. Were they down? Have you missed something? So you do that all the time. And all we needed was someone to come into our home and say, right, this is a common thing. You are going to, so when we were saying it was our fault, someone to say that is a natural thought, but that is likely not to be the case. You know, we can't say it wasn't our fault at that point. We didn't know how this had happened, but we still needed somebody to offer us some rational words while the rest of us were just completely falling apart. And I do believe, and having, you know, I've had so many lovely, lovely, incredibly brave letters and emails from other dads. And I'll never forget one came very early on and simply said, please don't be angry with Paul, because I've got close to that and I understand why he did it, and he would never have wanted to hurt you and the children. And that meant the absolute world to me. And I know that we not necessarily saved him, but we gave him hope. And that's what To Wish is about.
That's so powerful, and especially when you've got that emotional attachment, it must be so rewarding, but also so hard to read those letters sometimes.
Yeah, it is. But I just know that their lives mattered and their legacies helping so many others, and their names are being talked about all the time. They haven't been forgotten. But I get a lot of comfort from that as well, because I've never really, especially in the early days, I didn't know where to go. I was talking very openly with my family, but I never spoke. All I wanted to do was meet somebody further on in the journey to show myself that I would be okay at some point. And I didn't know where to go for that. And that's what a lot of our families want. They don't need counselling necessarily, or medication or anything like that, although many do. And I've tried everything. But what a lot of people want is just someone to talk to them and to sit with them and say, I understand, because it's the loneliest place.
And like you say, the people that are ahead of you in the journey that have
Yeah.
been through that, if you had that there, they could put an arm around you and say, we'll help you through.
Yeah.
With regards to it, you're not going to get over it, but they're going to help you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And and I blog a lot on social media, and I know some people probably go, oh, here she goes again. I don't do it to show off. I don't do it to show the world what an amazing thing my daughter or son's done or I've done. I do it because I want somebody out there to see, wow, they're all right. They're doing okay. It doesn't go away, but I will be able to live a life in a different way. Because that's what happens. My life is now a completely different life to what it was before.
You're a living example of what your charity stands for. And it's what I loved when you said it a minute ago. It's hope.
And that is what it is.
Yeah.
And, people listening to this, it's hard to listen to it. I get people who still cross the road because they don't want to speak to me about things. Certainly in the early days I did. I've had corporates, a couple of corporate companies saying to me, we would love to work with you, but you need to jolly it up a little bit, which, blew my mind really, which is why we have an organisation like we do, because we need to tackle the stigma around death. But I've got thick skin, and I understand that is just fear. They don't want to work with us because they think we are all doom and gloom. Well, actually, our families have been through the worst thing possible, but our charity brings hope to families. It gives them light. And that's why if you came into our office, it's such a lovely place to be. The staff smile and have fun, because we want people when they come in to know that we understand, but we also want to make sure that they know that life goes on. Yeah,
that's the positive out of it, isn't it?
Absolutely.
But it's an interesting point you say, when you've gone through something particularly tragic like that, or other scenarios in life, in people's some nature in terms of the way they react to you, like the crossing the street thing. That's crazy, isn't it? And the way that people don't necessarily want to interact because it's not positive.
That goes back to that. It's like what you said right at the start. It's that fear of the word death. That how do you use that, and how do you see it? And even some of the examples you said, what was it, 3 or 4 ways you were able to say what death was, and we all do it, don't we? And it's but we find the same with our claims teams. Hats off to our claims team who are speaking to someone in those first moments. Maybe looking at if they've got life covered or critical illness covered if it's an illness, and I don't know how they do that on the phones all day, but they're incredible. And it's like what you say, you'd expect walking into that claims department, it would be so doom and gloom and just really tough. And don't get me wrong, there are moments that are really hard. Yeah. But they're the ones that are there to uplift the person on the other end of the phone and actually make some life-changing confirmations, or, unfortunately sometimes not so much, but on the whole, they're able to help and support that person. And that's where that energy comes back, doesn't it?
When you've lost someone you love so dearly, the way you live your life with anxiety and worry and self-blame and self-loathing and things. So when you have a conversation with people, be it somebody in the street or somebody on the phone, you want to feel safe. You want to be listened to, and you want someone to be there to listen to your story, so they can hear the person who's died's name. And we use elephants at our organisation a lot because of the elephant in the room. Talking about death is very much the elephant in the room. People avoid it at all costs. Now, I always joke and say, if you went out for dinner with me, I don't sit there and talk about death the whole time, but I am really keen to make sure that it becomes part of conversations. So with my children, we've always used those words. We've always talked about if someone we know has died, we talk about that a little bit. It's obviously a fine line, but I think it's something that people need to be more open about. And I think, we never had a will when we got married. When we got married, we used to talk about it all the time. When we used to go away for weekends on our own, like, who would have the children? We didn't discuss anything like that because we were 32 and 33. Why would we? And then it happened to us. So it's having those conversations, but also knowing that it's okay to talk to people about these things. People cross the road. I lost friends, people across the road. And hand on heart, have I ever avoided somebody because I didn't know what to say? Probably. No one meant any harm. People just didn't want to make things worse. But actually, by avoiding it, you're making it a lot worse.
Yeah, people just don't realise.
They just don't know what to say.
Yeah.
So we do a lot of training. We do a lot of training through our organisation around having those conversations and how to speak to the bereaved, because a lot of our families have had really poor experiences of maybe speaking to the coroner or having to cancel bills or having to do things and being treated like they're just a number or being rushed. People have had letters with the wrong names, the wrong spellings, ripped open. Little things that actually in the whole scheme of what they're going through is very little. But just those touch points can massively change people's journey through their grief. I met amazing people over my years of going through this journey. And I've met those who perhaps aren't as amazing and aren't able to talk about things. So we always speak to employers when people are going back to work. How do you speak to a member of your team who's returned after losing their child? Do you ignore them and pretend it's not happened? Because that happens a lot, or do you simply talk to them about things? So we do a lot of bereavement training, which is really important, I think, for businesses to understand how people want to be talked to. Do you want your child's name to be said? You left the office on a normal working day and your child died and the photos of your children are still on the desk and you're coming back. Do you want them to stay there? Or do you want them to come down and you put them back up when you're ready? So little things that it's common sense to people like myself now who are working this, but for people who've never been touched by it, there is a lot that people can do to support those who are bereaved.
Absolutely, and I guess it's that fear of getting it wrong, isn't it? And,
huge.
And upsetting that person more. But I guess what I'm hearing from this, I could be wrong, is just do something if your intention's right and you're showing that person you care. Something's better than absolutely nothing at all for that individual.
Yeah. I've got it wrong. Sorry, yeah. I've got it wrong since.
Does, yeah.
I've done the thing saying to people, "Oh, it's early days. You're going to be okay." And then you think afterwards, that's the biggest cliche that really annoyed me when people said that to me. You are going to get it wrong, but to show you're human and that you care outweighs a lot of these
people
little
are engaging,
things.
Aren't they? They're showing that intent. Yeah, they might not know what to say, so they might accidentally
say the wrong thing
with a cliche or whatever, but they've done it. They've made that action, haven't they?
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned winding a little bit back to that letter you received from another gentleman, and saying don't dislike Paul, don't feel angry towards him. What was that a way you felt at one point towards Paul, if we may ask? Did you go through a series of different emotions and how you'd felt about his decision and what he did?
Yeah, I think it's the question that everyone asks me, especially my friends now say they were all very angry at the time. And I've always said that I have never been angry. And out of everybody, it's me that probably should have been angry. So please don't judge. I always say to people, for me, there wasn't any conscious decision to leave us. And in fact, his inquest was really interesting. They believed it was accidental death, even though we know he died by suicide. They believe that he didn't leave the house that day with any intention, that this was sort of like a mental incident following the sudden death of George and what we went through that night, which was extremely traumatic. So no, I've never been angry about what happened, ever. And I talk very openly about that and the pride I've always had for him. The only time I get angry now is when my children are doing things, achieving, doing incredible, we have moments through sport and things like that and academic stuff that he cannot be here for. And that's when I say, just why? But no, I've never been angry with him. And I don't think we are in any position to judge his mental state at the time. Right. And we've obviously never been in that mental state.
I can totally relate to that in terms of what he's missed out on and the interaction that the children have missed out on, and yourselves. You mentioned earlier about death being the elephant in the room. And I thought that was a really interesting way to describe it. And it's totally true, isn't it? And be able to talk to people, particularly when they've had the sudden death of a child. We have a lot of advisors that talk to customers. They watch these podcasts, listen to these podcasts, and they talk to customers about the impact of death, critical illness, and all that type of thing. And sometimes that can be an uncomfortable conversation, particularly for someone new into the industry, a new advisor who's just trying to get their experience. I just like the way you describe that. How important do you think it is for them to have that elephant in the room conversation with a customer when thinking about finances and things? Because you said that Paul was the main breadwinner, and the impact of what you've gone through.
It's so important, but it's something that you feel is not relevant to you. So it's very, very difficult. So I can remember before we lost the boys, having types of conversations around, I'm only 32. I don't need to talk about that. We don't need that, and you do shrug it off. And until you've been through it and seen the consequences or the potential consequences, I don't think you have those conversations, but it is so important. Like I know my friends afterwards, they all went out and got a will sorted. They all went out and bought cameras because I took so many photos of George and they didn't take photos of their children. But hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? And I just think it's so important to have those conversations, but they need to be the right conversations. Yep. I think training and education in all areas around death is needed because we've all got our own perceptions of what that is. So when you are talking to somebody, or especially talking to a client or somebody on the phone, one wrong word could really have a big impact on somebody. So it's really important that the people doing it are prepared, have had training working with vulnerable people to make sure that those conversations come across in the way that they're meant to come across.
That's totally.
And it's that vulnerable people piece. I mean, nobody knows what's happening round the corner for them. It's just equally exciting but scary, isn't it? We don't know what life has in store. So I think from an advisor's point of view, any client can become vulnerable within a matter of minutes, can't they? And it's having that conversation before it's too late. Yeah. When you were in that kind of period of life where you think, I'm too young, I'm going to shrug it off, etc. Did you get any advice on finances at any point, or was it just literally like that's something for another day, we'll deal with it at some
absolutely.
point?
I had my job, never been money focused, so I never really looked at my pay slips. I enjoyed my job, and we went on holiday. We had a nice house. We didn't want for anything. We didn't have a lot of money, but no, because I was just too young to think of anything like that, looking back. And we both were like that as well. So when this happened, and then you realize you've got a joint mortgage and you've got, a joint loan. We had a small joint loan for something, but then our bank account was joint. So everything got shut down, everything. So I couldn't access our joint account because his name was on it, but I also had to pay the mortgage because my name was on that. And I was very, very fortunate to have not only an amazing family who helped me financially, but also Paul's company were phenomenal with me and looked after me, which was amazing.
That's
amazing. And they were a very big company, and they could have just seen him as a number and forgotten about us, and they didn't. So that changed our lives. But there's a lot of people who in that situation we'd have lost the house if I hadn't had my family. And that's just an awful position to be in when you've lost so much and you want to keep stability for the children, to think that, and that's what I originally thought straight away, was I'm going to lose everything.
Yeah. And at a moment where you already feel you've lost the worst, that, it's I don't even know how to describe.
You don't want to phone anyone
either.
Don't
even want to deal
so
with
like
it,
my I had a lot of PTSD following it, and I could not pick up the phone and have a conversation with people. I was scared of what they were going to say, what they were going to do, that they were going to give me bad news about everything. And you just feel so alone. And my family, my sister was amazing. She did all the phone calls for me, cancelling things and finding out what was going on. We both had our own bank accounts that I would never have known how to access because we hadn't discussed losing each other. So yeah, we were very fortunate, but I learned a lot from that. And I think families now who are losing children realize that life is very vulnerable and anything could happen at any time.
Absolutely.
I think it's when you the focus of life, obviously you're doing things joint, it's a joint, you're going through life together. There is a lot of, I suppose, rhetoric out there about doing things for yourself, helping yourself and all that type of thing. But the implications of not being intertwined financially and having things set up aren't really covered that much, are they? Powers of attorney, stuff like that, wills being set up, like you say, implications of not having, insurances in place, that type of stuff. It's getting the importance of getting that out there, isn't it?
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just a huge thing, isn't it? Just so huge.
I don't think people. It's the practicalities of losing a loved one can be as difficult, sometimes worse, than the emotions involved, because you can lose so much. I couldn't have gone back to work and worked full time, for instance, even if I'd wanted to, with two young children. So it's that whole practical element of it all as well is something that people don't remember when you go through that.
Yeah. And at what point, because obviously you're feeling totally empty, and like as we've already said, can't imagine how you were feeling, but at what point did the financial element start to hit you, into the implications, of him not being there, not being able to access accounts and things?
Pretty much immediately.
Was it? Okay.
Because I had to pay the nursery bills and I had to pay bills, and I couldn't access my bank to do it. Like, things may have changed now. This is 13 years ago. So like instantly I had no control over anything financially, really. And that was hard, because you'd lost your identity, and now you were losing your independence. And I did lose my independence for a long time because I had to rely on my family to help me. And that is really difficult when you go from having someone who provided for you, and you have this very innocent family who's just bumbling through life, and then this happens. It was really, really difficult. And I can remember before the funeral, I went down and wrote my will with my brother-in-law, because we didn't have a will, obviously. And then obviously if anything had happened to me immediately afterwards, for some reason, what would have happened with the children and everything else? So I went straight down and we did that immediately.
Just thought, even with the funeral, I hadn't even thought of that. I mean, you have your son's funeral, but then also suddenly your husband's funeral to now think about as well. And even the costs associated and the emotional drain of then thinking, oh, I've got my son's funeral to plan with my husband now, actually doing both completely on my own, I guess.
Yeah, like my sister and my family paid for the funeral. My sister paid. I didn't have any money. And as I said, I was very, very fortunate. And there are some amazingly good people around when it comes to a child's funeral. So in Wales now, there are bereavement grants for funerals of children. A lot of people don't charge for funerals of children in Wales and further afield, but it's a massive expense. And yeah, people don't think about that either.
Oh. No, you don't, do you? And it's definitely something, I think. You see these pages, like the GoFundMe pages and things like that online, and you think, and you do as a human being, you think, oh, that's somebody, what a shame that somebody else will do. You never really put yourself in that scenario and think, wow, that could have been me, that could be me, do you? Until it's, as you said,
and
hindsight.
Especially working in the area we do of sudden loss, it does make you realise that literally a split second sometimes is all it takes. And you can't live your life like that, because you wouldn't leave your room or leave your house, would you, every day? But it's something that you do need to consider, definitely.
Absolutely.
And in terms of the thing I'd like to touch back on, Rhian, is with your children now. So when they look back on it all, do they have memory of this, or what's their kind of view of that time, or their thoughts going through life?
They remember very, very little. What do we remember of being 2 and 3? I think I've created their memories. So, for instance, Paul was a massive Liverpool fan, huge Liverpool fan. And my kids know that because I have talked to them about that and talked about some of his memories. They don't remember anything. They remember very random things, like, oh, Daddy took, like, very random things. Like, we used to go into this bridge to nursery, and we used to call it a troll bridge. And they remember that. They don't remember very much at all. And I'm okay with that, because for me, if they did remember, then that means they may have lived with quite a lot of sadness. And actually they are phenomenal. They are now 16 and 17. They are normal 16 and 17-year-olds. What's normal, and I think I worried too much about that when it happened. Was they haven't got a dad now, and they're going to get picked on for this, and he took his own life, so they're going to be picked on for that. But actually, I can hand on heart honestly say that the generation they're in is so much more accepting than perhaps older generations. They've never had a problem. People talk about it all the time. They know about the charity. They know about my story. But they haven't got much that they remember. But photos are still up in the house. Like, I'm really lucky. I met another an incredible man who I'm now married to, and he's amazing and very accepting. But I've still got photos up of the kids with their dad. You know, we celebrate and think about them a lot, and social media and everything. So they live on in our family massively, and who knows what the future holds for them, the children. I think they will probably have more questions as they grow up, but the biggest tip I'd give is always just to be honest. So whenever they've asked me anything in the past, I've been as honest as I can be. It took me many years to tell them what happened to Paul, but I built it up into he left the house, he fell over, like all these different things. I was never lying, but eventually I had to talk to them about it when they hit around 9 and 10, because I was on a TV program that was going to talk about it and I didn't want them to hear it from anyone else. But life is good. And I think that's something I like to say towards the end of any of these, is that, you know, life is good. I do smile a lot and laugh a lot, and I'm very happy. I've got a wonderful family still. I'm very proud of the boys, and they're part of what we do every day. But it's important that I live a life for them and continue going for the kids. And that's really important, I think. But it is also, you know, I do think more of the future than I used to when I was that 32-year-old and quite naive that these things do happen to people of my age.
And the experience you've got has just been channeled into Wish in terms of helping others out there, which is, you know, what a great thing to have. And
thank you.
Just what a strapline for that.
Thank you so much, Rhian.
Thank you.
I think so many people could learn a lot, whether they're in advice, whether they're not advising, just about how to. I mean, I've learned a lot just even thinking, you know, if that happened to a colleague, you know, how would we help them and how would we approach it? If you had one bit of advice to somebody listening to this, what would be your key piece of advice for them to take away from this?
I think firstly, if it's somebody who is struggling with their own loss, there are organisations out there that will listen and support you. I think there's a lot of people who don't want to talk about it, and that's something that I know certainly has helped me, has been very open about it and talking. And there are people out there who you can talk to, even if it's in confidence. But it's also making sure that if you are speaking to the bereaved, even, you know, advising them, is to try and have conversations with people to make sure you're having those conversations right. You know, just be kind. And I always say, and I do this, you know, I do a lot of training with police officers and first responders, is making sure that you treat those people as if you'd want your family members to be treated, because, you know, these touch points are so important. And Wish is always there if there is any organisations out there that would like some support about having these conversations. We are online, and just get in touch, and I'm sure we can arrange that.
No, it's a wonderful charity, and I think,
thank you.
As Wayne said, you're bringing hope from a place where you've had really difficult times. You've managed to turn that into something helping others. I think it's completely inspirational.
It is totally.
Oh, well, thank you so much, and thank you for having me.
Thank you.
You.